ran a tag. I've never seen it before. A Florida tag. It's never come back to anything before. So that's the reason for the stop.
What was the tag run for?
I'm sorry?
What was the tag run for?
Oh, we run tags all the time, whether it's at traffic lights and that sort of stuff. That's how we figure out if, cars are stolen and that sort of thing. Also, the windows are really dark. I don't have a tint measurer, but that's another reason for the stop.
Do you guys have cards on you?
Yeah, 1 second. Actually, this isn't my car, but I can write my name down if you'd like.
That was the Florida State Attorney Aramis Ayala being pulled over last month in Orlando. I want to give you a little law enforcement perspective on this, and we brought in former LAPD Sgt Cheryl Dorsey, and you were immediately somebody we wanted to talk to, because I think there's, we looked at, it feels weird that she was pulled over, but let's talk about law enforcement. They were an illegal right to pull her over.
Absolutely. There's something called an officer-initiated activity, and it's what we do all the time as police officers. And that's why I say sometimes it's important just to comply with an officer's request, because you never know. Right, you never know what precipitated that, right? And so it's not uncommon to see a license plate that maybe a young officer on the job is not familiar with. Because
yes, I was really struck by that. This young officer said, we ran your tag and it didn't come back, and that's why we pulled you over. She has the right to have, and she, of course, is given that privacy, confidentiality, because she is the state attorney. It's not something that an officer would see very often?
Well, the fact that it's a confidential plate is not uncommon. And again, I think this may be a young officer on that department, and maybe this is the first time he's encountered it. There's certain dignitaries that also have personal plates that look very different from what we're used to seeing. And so as a police officer...
Is that a red flag?
Well, if you've never seen it before, it could be, right? And so you have an obligation as an officer, if you see something that's unfamiliar to you, that could be something is amiss, then you have a responsibility to investigate it. That's what we do. And then once you find out it's nothing, you're polite and you dust the person off, you identify yourself as this officer did, and you send them on their way. And so I understand in this environment, it's kind of off-putting and it seems like it's manufactured, but this was a legitimate stop.
This was a legitimate stop. Would you buy the idea that the concern over the tint of her windows was enough to warrant her being stopped?
If dark limo tint is something that is not allowed on the front
driver's side
and passenger side of your vehicle, and you have it, then you run the risk of being stopped by the police. And so if you don't want to be stopped by the police, then don't give them a reason to stop you.
Right. She said the tint wasn't an issue.
And I don't know what the laws are there in Florida with regards to the tint. And understand, when we see this video, her windows are down, so I'm not able to see the level of tint on her car.
Does any of this feel odd to you off?
As a police officer and a supervisor, no, it doesn't feel odd to me. But given the circumstances and the totality of what goes on and what we see, I understand why others who are not informed would be bothered by this stop and assume this is just another case of officer racially profiling. They see a black woman in a car and want to create a reason to have a conversation. That happens. We know that, acknowledge that. And so if that happens and you feel that's going on, you be a good witness, you be an advocate for yourself, do what the officer says, and then you issue a complaint in writing later.
But you don't believe that's what this was?
That's not what this was. This was a legitimate stop. And they said that in the article, right? But I understand the angst behind it, and I understand why she would want to follow up with that department and have a conversation and make sure that officers are acting appropriately. And as long as you explain to people why you stopped them, they're generally happy.
We know that she is going to have a conversation with the chief of police there, and we'll see what happens from there. Cheryl Dorsey, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.